Hello everyone, I'm back. Here's a self-portrait that I did a long time ago. Some of you might not have been alive when I did this. Doesn't matter. I used to do a lot of portraiture, self-portraiture, where I was wearing respirators and protective gear, and it seems a bit kind of prophetic now, I've been told. It wasn't really about viruses, but anyhow, I do a lot of portraits, self-portraits, and I want to let you know that what I'm teaching you are things that I've actually applied to my own work, and hopefully I can share with you what I've learned from my own experiences, but from some amazing drawing professors I've had over the years as well. So, anyhow, I thought I'd show you that. You're not actually going to see my own person today. You'll see my hands, you'll hear my voice. So this is as close as you're going to get. It's hard to show myself with this. I have this overhead kind of setup, this apparatus. For this. So things you're going to want to have handy for this might look familiar here. This is where we left off. Pencils, erasers, pens, all good things to have. I'm going to use this eraser instead. And of course the references that you want to use. You're going to have your handout about this project and the drawing manual, models, and methods right here, turning to pages, basically starting really around page 33 with the skull and on. There's so many good references about drawing the skull and the human head. So have that with you as well. I'm going to have references that include my egg-shaped masses, which you're probably getting sick of seeing by now. But I also have my human skull cast. It's not a real skull. Whoops. Sorry about that, guys. He lost his head. But anyhow, I'm going to be referring to the actual skull as we do this project. Wow, that kind of got away from me. Okay, so let me lock this up so that doesn't happen again. All right, and we'll go ahead and get started with continuing our drawing. This is step 2. So we went from the egg shapes. We're going to be going to the actual skull in this video. Having a 2H and a 2B pencil is pretty ideal for this, just like the previous steps. We might go in with some pens. We might use the Micron pen towards the end, and having that click eraser is nice too. So have these things handy. If you have the PowerPoint for this up on a screen where you can view it easily, that is highly recommended. Pretty ideal. Okay, so I got a new setup since my last video. Hopefully this one will be a little bit better in terms of its production. Things won't be shaking. The table won't be shaking, anything like that. Alright, so let's get this stuff out of the way and proceed to step 2 of this manual, of this handout, shaping the skull using anatomical landmarks. So we're going to be referencing anatomical landmarks, identifying them in this portion of the project. Okay, so I got my 2B pencil, I got my 2B here, and I got a 2H here. Have a sharpener handy too, I'd recommend. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is the skull exists inside of those egg-shaped masses that we've already drawn. So we've kind of got the bulk of this figure done. Let's go ahead and start to refine it in terms of the skull. So I mentioned anatomical landmarks. One anatomical landmark right here, and I'll show you the skull. Hopefully it won't lose its cranium this time. It's called the mastoid process. All right, that's this knob right here. You can feel it right below your ear. A major neck muscle called the sternomastoid attaches here, and then it goes all the way down to your sternum, hence the name sternomastoid. So anytime you see a bony protrusion, a knob on the human skeleton, that's your clue that a major muscle, an important muscle, attaches to that. 'Cause muscles need really good places to adhere to. They just can't stick. They have to have something strong, and that's what the skeleton, these anatomical landmarks will show you. Okay, so the mastoid process, it's really right at this point that's right kind of at that quarter height from 1, 2, and then 2 from the bottom, and it's kind of where your cranial mass egg kind of exists. So it's just this shape like this in the profile. All right, so let's talk about maybe the jawline next. Now the jawline on the human skeleton, and I mentioned that, or the skull, is things are never horizontal or strictly vertical. Very rarely will you see that. The edge of the jawline is at this angle like this, and then it goes somewhere like that. So this egg-shaped mass, we're going to be kind of cutting into that some. I'm going to be drawing more angular now rather than round, because the skull has a lot of sharp angles to it. So we're working on the profile view, I should mention, starting off with that. Talk about the mental protuberance. That's just a fancy word for the chin. And it comes out, if you ever think of like a chin strap and how it's shaped, you can really kind of understand how the mental protuberance and the chin really form these strong angles. So you have this angle coming out, you got an angle coming in, and then you got the jawline here, and then the inside of the jawline here, which will really form where the ear is going to attach in a little bit. Okay, so we got that. We got the mental protuberance as kind of illustrated in your handout. It's not a bad idea to write these down as you go or after you're done. And so let's talk now a little bit about the eye socket. Okay, so the eye socket is seen from the profile here. We've talked a lot about ellipses in our classes, okay? So let's just go, here's the edge of the jawline, here's the bottom of the jawline, here's our mental protuberance. You can see everything is very angular. When we get to the mouth, you're going to be drawing this very rounded form. But here's your eye socket in the profile view. It's very foreshortened. In the straight on view, the eye sockets kind of make a lot more sense. But what happens when you go this way? It's very similar to what happens. I'm going to take my pair of glasses. So you have a pair of glasses, and then you turn them this way. See that? You have very, very little sense of space between the front and the back of the eye socket. The eye socket is very foreshortened in the profile view. It becomes what we call, remember the ellipse. We have the magical ellipse. So again, the circle here, well, that's a really terrible circle. Seen from the side, foreshortened becomes the ellipse. So we're going to be making that eye socket into more or less an elliptical shape, because that's what it is. So the eye socket starts where the brow ridge is, which is slightly above that halfway line. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this indentation somewhere above that halfway line here, and have the eye socket start somewhere inside. The eye socket starts inside of the skull. It doesn't exist on the edge. Features exist on the inside. So I'm drawing this disc-like shape for the eye socket. Again, an ellipse or a disc-like shape is what's going to represent that eye socket in a foreshortened view, which the profile most definitely is for that. So I got my eye socket in, I got my mental protuberance in. Sometimes the eye socket, technically it's called the orbit, but you can call it the eye socket too. That's more the layman's term, but that's cool, as long as you know what we're talking about. So let's go ahead and let's talk about the temple and then the zygomatic arch. So the temple is that bony ridge that's right above your eye socket, and then it kind of comes down like this. And then we're going to have this zygomatic arch. Really cool. Where is the zygomatic arch? We're going to go ahead and just kind of sketch that in. And that's going to become the cheekbone. So let's look at our skull really quick again. Here's our zygomatic arch. Here's our temple right there, okay? So we're simplifying that. We're not trying to draw it exactly 100% accurate. We're just going to go for more of a general kind of shape and direction to it. So the nasal ridge, the nasal bone, is actually going to slightly protrude from the outside of our square here. And we're going to have this hollow shape that represents that cavity the nasal kind of socket. And then secondly, we're going to be looking at our handout again, and we're going to be drawing the shape of the mouth as this round barrel-like kind of mass. The mouth kind of bulges forward, comes forward, and it curves in. And it kind of goes, that line of it overlaps the line of the chin, and the mouth actually goes in front of that nasal bone too. So we're going to go ahead, we'll draw this kind of pointy ridge here, thinking about that nasal bone socket as hollow. Don't go in though and fill in black areas. Just leave things light because we're going to be going over this for the fleshing out the figure. All right, so the actual shape of the mouth too. And when I say the shape of the mouth, I mean this, I should mention the form of the mouth, this rounded barrel-like shape. And between the mouth, the opening of the mouth is what I'm talking about, kind of right here, between the upper jaw and the lower jaw. The lower jaw is a separate bone from the rest of the skull. Okay, and I'm going to just put this kind of shape in here. So the mouth is round, so the shape of the opening of the mouth between the upper and lower jaw is round too. Again, if you're drawing anything on a rounded form, everything on a rounded form is going to have a rounded direction to it. All right, my skull's looking pretty good, I think. A couple more things really quick, at least the profile view of it. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of get a little bit more information in for the jawline, the top of the jaw, and kind of create a bit of a shape for the back of the mouth, and then give the temple, the inside of the temple, kind of here. All right, so I feel pretty good. So here's my brow ridge, that's the anatomical landmark, and I might go ahead and make a bit of a kind of a furrowed brow here. I might straighten this out a little bit here. I guess I'm going to be drawing a male human being. Men tend to have higher, straighter foreheads. Women tend to have rounder foreheads. That's just the way it works. Also may indicate a little bit more of the inside of the cheekbone. So here's the outside of the cheekbone right here. I'm going to draw this line representing the inside plane of the cheekbone. So if you look at our skull again, you get this plane change from here. It's just the front to the side. Everything goes from front to side. Thinking about front to side kind of all the time. And then again, our interlocking egg-shaped masses continue like behind that eye socket and reappear behind the zygomatic arch and then over to this side. Okay, so I think we're pretty good on the profile view of the skull. Again, this should be as tall as it is wide. We're going to go to the straight on view. My skull over here. It's nice to have all these references, visual aids. I'm glad I took these from school before we got kicked out. Anyway, I just really hope you guys are all doing well. Everyone's doing well who might be watching this, because it's a difficult time right now. All right, so I have a few more visual aids for this view. Straight on view. So we have our straight up and down here. This is going to be more or less a symmetrical view. The human head, though, however, is not symmetrical. People are not symmetrical. Very few people have eyeballs or exist on a perfectly flat plane. I guess symmetry is considered beautiful. Very few people have perfect symmetry, if at all. So don't worry if your head doesn't look perfect, because people aren't perfect. And they're going to look more human, in other words, if you make them slightly off. So let's go ahead and start fleshing this out. Now, remember the point of this whole system of the squares being on the same plane is that you're going to relate everything to each other. So when you put the eye socket in, the eye socket should be in the same location, top to bottom, as in the profile view. Does that make sense? It's important for this project. The whole concept is kind of based on that ability to kind of read across the three different views. All right, so I'm going to turn my skull to face me so I can see it better. Look at your references, though, guys, for that. All right, so looking at my handout, let's see, where should I start for this? I think I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start with the eye sockets. Now we're going to draw the eye sockets versus the eye socket from the straight on view, or the orbits. So one thing I like to, when I draw the eye sockets from the straight on view and in the 3/4 view, is I think about like safety goggles or welding goggles. You see that shape being made by the welding goggles, or the safety goggles, I'm sorry. They're creating an interconnected shape. And when you draw the eye sockets, let me go ahead and stick it on my skull here. I do weird stuff like this all the time, but hopefully you get the point that these shapes that are created by glasses like this are really simplifications of the eye sockets. And you'll notice they're connected together on a continuous shape. You don't want to draw, in other words, you don't want to draw one eye socket and the other, you want to draw them connected together, just like they are in those goggles there. So the center of those goggles is going to be on that vertical midline. So connected across again, the top of my goggles are going to be at the same height as my eye socket in my profile view. I'm going to go ahead and draw this pair of goggles, more or less. Now the eyes don't come out, the eye sockets don't come out to the edge of the head, okay? They sit inside the head. I might put a little bit more of a kind of an arch here in the middle. Okay, that's looking okay. Again, this is a simplification. You can always make it more elaborate as we go. I am going to go now though, and I'm going to separate my eye sockets a little bit. There's going to be a space between the eye sockets. The eye sockets have a good width between them. But like I said, I like to use the idea of that safety goggles as a start, because the eye sockets do slant downward. They go from peak in the middle and then they start to slant downward towards the outside of the head. Now they're actually as rounded as those goggles are. I'm going to kind of straighten them out a little bit, make them a little bit more angular. And I'm going to compare them. Are they about the same location? I might have to dip it down a little bit more. All right, so there's kind of my eye sockets, at least for now. We'll refine them in a bit. Talking about the nasal bone, the nasal ridge. Now, looking over here, the top of that nasal cavity is like right around here. And from the straight on view, the nasal bone in this cavity, let's see if we're connecting together again, is this kind of shape, something like that. I don't know what you call that shape. But that's the opening. Again, I might put a little bit of value in there, but don't fill in darkness for like the eye sockets or the nasal cavity, anything like that. Okay, so we got that. Now one thing, a reference I don't have with me at the moment, I wish I did, is I have these in class. Every drawing class has these objects, bowling pins. There's this kind of middle form of the human head that kind of really is best kind of understood as a bowling pin. And that bowling pin shape represents really the center of the head. So here's like the top of a bowling pin, and then as the pin curves inward, that becomes inside the eye sockets, and then as it starts to swell again, it becomes the outside of the nasal bone, and then it starts to become the form of the mouth. And maybe it's not like a real bowling pin, maybe it's more like a kid's bowling pin. But if you look at this shape, and it's actually the form too, very similar to a bowling pin. All right, I could have drawn that top of the bowling pin a lot better. But anyhow, do you see that? So here's our bowling pin, and that's going to connect the top to the bottom and start to create the form of the mouth. Speaking of the mouth, really the opening of the mouth is something like this. We're not going to be drawing teeth for the skull. We're not going to be drawing all these like nooks and crannies and ridges. That's not really what we're getting into. We're going to be focusing on what's called artistic anatomy. In other words, anatomy that we as artists can use to draw better. We're not going to be drawing things that aren't important to understanding the head or the form of the head or the body for that matter. So details like, all these teeth, these ridges, we don't see those on the human figure. So we're not going to concentrate on those, in other words. We're going to concentrate on the parts of the skeleton that are visible on the figure, and therefore we can see them on the actual person and kind of understand what's going on. So don't get too into details here. All right, so I got my eye sockets, I got my nasal cavity, I got my mouth, my middle protuberance from the straight on view looks a lot like a chin strap, just like a football helmet, if you ever wore a football helmet. Now, the mouth, the form of the jaw is a lot more angular in a person than an egg. So we're just kind of using that egg shape to kind of help us get started, but then we're going to kind of add a little bit to it to kind of flesh it out and make it look a little more human, make it more like a skull, something like that. Okay, we're getting pretty far along here. Talk about the temples. I might just erase a little bit that top of the bowling pin. That might be a little bit off, so let's kind of kick that down a little bit. The top of my eye sockets might be a little high too, now that I look at it. These are things that you guys can adjust at any time. And maybe I'll go ahead and just put a darker pencil at some point. Okay, so we're getting into our skull a little bit more. All right, so our temples are going to be something kind of like this. And then our zygomatic arch comes out slightly below that halfway line. So the bottom of the eye socket should be in the same plane. Everything if there's two of anything in the human head, in the human figure, and all things are kind of leveled, it should be more or less on the same plane. That's why the axis lines, we talk about axis lines all the time. These lines in the grid or the square are your axis lines. Okay. So we're kind of getting into our skull a little bit. It's not going to look, like I said, like this finished idea of what you think of as a skull. It's just going to be what's more of a structure of the skull, because that's what's important to understanding the actual head, not all the details, the nooks and crannies. All right. Eye sockets might be a little bit shaped weird, but okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the forehead, or a lot about the forehead. One thing is the forehead is really your biggest feature in terms of when you look at the face. You see more of the forehead is bigger than your chin or your mouth. It goes all the way up here. And there's a lot of plane changes happening in the forehead that happen in the rest of the skull, but they're most kind of easily understood inside of the actual forehead. So we're going to create these plane changes in the forehead. The very front of the forehead is a shape, something that looks kind of like a trapezoid. So this is like plane number 1 here. And then it starts to turn around where the eye socket kind of changes direction. There's this big kind of directional change in the forehead here. Something like that. You see it in that illustration. Here, you can see that big plane change here. So we got one plane change. We got the front, which is a plane change. We got the left side, which is another plane change. Already we have 3 different plane changes in the forehead. And then lastly, we have a plane change right around here. So, whoops. We got the front here, we got one side here, we got another side there, and then we got this huge dramatic turn right at the top of the temples, which represents the side of the head going into cranial mass. So we have actually 5 plane changes that happen inside of the forehead alone. So we got kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 going from left to right. So you want to have those plane changes in your skull from left to right. My mouth might need to get a little bit wider in terms of its shape, but getting kind of close to finishing the frontal view. This is probably the hardest part, doing the skull. I am going to kind of round, like get a little bit rid of that round egg shape. I might go over my skull now with a darker pencil. Going to help me discern a little bit better some of these forms that I've been working on, get rid of some of the older lines. Like this shape needs to come up a little bit higher there. All right, it's getting better. Skull does have this kind of sly smile to it. Hopefully, yeah, it's looking better now. Okay, so let's see, I think that's pretty good. One thing I do want to mention really quick, let's go ahead and emphasize that front plane of the nasal ridge and that side, left and right side of the nasal ridge as well. The nose has a front, a left, and a right, just like all forms have a left, right, front, top, and bottom. And I am going to introduce here the brow ridge. You can really see it's pretty obvious on my skull here. This is the brow kind of ridge. There's this shape right here, which kind of the eyebrows rest on. It looks a lot like a bird kind of flying in the distance. Remember when you drew birds as a kid? Something like that. So you get this shape here, which is kind of on that center line, that really becomes the brow ridge. And it's kind of like these lobe-like masses on left to right that kind of create the brow ridge. You can see this in some people a lot more than others. Again, the human head has so many varieties to it that that's what makes it so fascinating and difficult to draw. So again, here's my 1 plane here, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. All right, I think we're done with the straight on view of the skull. Let's go to the 3/4, my favorite and kind of the most difficult for a lot of people, for me too. 3/4 view coming up. So again, now we're looking at things not straight on, not profile, but turned towards you. And we're going to start off again with our eye sockets. Now we have our, looking at these goggles. Here's the profile, straight on, 3/4. What happens in the 3/4 view is we get this really dynamic plane change from the side to the front. I might even start to indicate that now, something like that. You want to think going away from you in 2 different directions. We have a 2-point perspective happening in the head. Okay, so the eye sockets are still going to be located on that same height from one view to the next. Don't want to change that. Now that midline that we drew on our egg shapes is going to be our midline for the 3/4 view of the skull as well. So in other words, we have a whole other eye socket that's going to be on the outside of that, and another eye socket is going to be on the inside of that. And things are going to be changing pretty fast. We don't have equal, things are not symmetrical now. So we see one eye socket's closest to us. We're going to see a lot more of that one. It's going to be bigger on the page than the one that's further away. The one that's further away is going to be smaller in scale. It's going back to you from you. It's going to be overlapped by the nose too, just like in our illustration here. So check that out. You can see that this eye socket looks more like you think of an eye socket. And then the nose is in front of the opposite one. And that other one's very foreshortened, much smaller in scale. All right, let's go ahead and start to sketch in that shape of the eye sockets. Just like we did earlier, except now we're going to have one eye socket or lens be bigger than the other. It's going to still come up in the middle and still kind of tilt down. But now we only see one of them closest to us. The opposite one is going to be much smaller. In fact, it's best to kind of think about it going away from you in this direction, changing scale. Imagine it going to a vanishing point somewhere out in the distance. Our midline is going to be used to help us kind of put in separation between the eye sockets and also, of course, the nose. So again, try to connect the two together. And you'll see from the 3/4 view that the nose actually overlaps and hides some of that opposite eye socket. And that's true if you look at a person in the 3/4 view. The nose of a human being will hide and obscure that eye socket that's being overlapped by it. It's kind of tricky. You don't see everything equally in the 3/4 view. So here's my kind of eye socket here. I actually need to kind of like have that shape kind of dip in a little bit. So it's not actually rounded like a pair of glasses. The eye socket kind of curves inward. And again, it's going to be getting bigger as it comes towards me. Here's my nasal cavity. That's going to be foreshortened too. You don't see the opposite side of the nasal bone. You only see the front of it, and then you see, in this case, which would be what? Like the left side of it facing the viewer here. Whereas in the front view, you see the three sides of it. You see the center, you see the left, you see the right. This side, you're only going to see two sides of it. Whereas the profile, you only really see one side of it. So all these things need to be taken into consideration. So the cheekbones, just like in my drawing here, exist on the same plane, the same axis, just like the bottom of the eye sockets exist on the same axis. So here's my front of my head, and then where the cheekbones kind of turn into that zygomatic arch, they turn backwards this way. So here's my big plane change. Here's the side to the front, side, front, okay? If you don't get that, if you don't think about getting that, you're going to really miss that idea of the 3/4 view. It's going to be kind of flat, and it's not going to have the sense of structure. Even if your drafting isn't great or perfect, everyone's drafting can get better, mine included. But if you don't strive to get that big directional change between the side and the front of the head, 3/4 view, it's just going to be kind of flat and not really understood. That's why it's one of the most challenging view, I think, because there's this dynamic thing happening. So here's my front to my side. Zygomatic arch here, orbits here. Let's see what else are we missing here. We got the brow ridge. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The nasal ridge we talked about. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the mouth. Now the mouth is really a big form in the head. It's not just the teeth, it's not the opening between the teeth, but it's the whole rounded part of the mass of the mouth there. It's like a barrel shape. And that barrel shape goes around and kind of behind in the nasal ridge. So the mouth actually starts behind that. So these lines that overlap, these kind contour lines that overlap show a lot of form. So this is the mouth's gonna actually kind of bulge forward a little bit, add a little bit more kind of mass to our egg shapes, and then it's gonna go inward, and the chin's gonna come out kind of from behind that. And then here's the bottom of my chin, here's the side of the chin, and then the chin's gonna meet the jawline. And remember that angle of the jawline goes up that way. And then it's gonna make an angle here. So we're starting to get, I think, a pretty decent view of the 3/4. It's gonna allow us to turn our skull into a person. Sorry about that. And so I did add a little bit of mass, different shapes to my mouth. I'm gonna change the direction of that midline a little bit. It's gonna swell out kind of there too. Okay. So we're getting pretty close now to finishing this guy off. Calling it a demo. Here's kind of the inside of my mouth. I'm gonna put that shape of the mouth, the opening between the upper and lower jaw right here. And at that midline, it's gonna curve down and it's gonna start to curve away, something like that. Okay. How we doing? You guys doing okay? All right, I mentioned this kind of center straight line here, like an arrow going through your head. I'm gonna like erase that for now. Might get in the way of our forehead. So our brow ridge is kind of over here. And again, no longer will it just be an M shape. Now it's gonna be like a little M and then like a big part of the M here. It's getting foreshortened by that midline. So we're gonna see this shape here, and then it's gonna be bigger kind of over here. Remember, everything that's closer to you is bigger in scale. These eye sockets are the same actual size, of course, but one of them is closer to you than the other. So you get scale change. And that happens in everything, whether the space is large or small, the distance is large or small. It's just good to realize that at the top and the bottom, again, the eye socket are going to meet at some point in space. They're going to converge. It goes back to perspective, convergence. Parallel lines converge in space. Let's talk about our forehead. We mentioned here in maybe the profile, go back to that, we got a pretty strong kind of straight angle and then it curves back. We can extrapolate kind of all the way across all three views here. So right here, my forehead, it's pretty angular, but then it starts to go, when I go back at more of a curve kind of here. Now, from the 3/4 view, you only see kind of, look at my skull again, you're only going to see like 1, 2, 3, and 4 views, 4 angles of the forehead. We don't see 5 of them. The fourth angle is very foreshortened. So let's go ahead. Let's draw that shape in for like the center, which is like that shape there. We're going to draw that first. And remember, it kind of flares out at that brow ridge where it meets kind of the eye socket. The eye socket kind of tilts up, and then the brow ridge, where it meets the brow ridge, it tilts down pretty suddenly. Look at your eyebrows. Your eyebrows go kind of up and they tilt down. And they tilt down where they meet the brow ridge. The eyebrows really just follow the shape of that brow ridge. And they are part of that kind of form. They're not separate from it. So here's my kind of inside plane of my forehead right here. So there's one plane change, there's 2 plane changes, and then we got our kind of right at the temple where the cranium really turns back. We got this dramatic plane change right here. So there's 1, 2, 3, and the fourth one is this incredibly foreshortened view of the opposite side of the forehead. You don't see much of it. It's there, but it's very foreshortened. All right, let's talk about, here's our mantle protuberance here, our mastoid process. Where has that gone to? I haven't talked about him in a while. You don't really see the mastoid process in the front view. You might make that jaw, it might have been a little thick. Our mastoid process, again, is somewhere over here. Zygomatic arch is right there. Orbits are here. middle protuberance here, brow ridge here, nasal ridge here. All right, so I think we're pretty good on the steps right here. So we got our 3 views of the skull laid in. Of the 3 of them, I think this frontal view I probably did the worst job on, which is odd because usually that's one of the easier ones. I might work on this a little bit. That looks a little better right there. I think the cheekbones can be a little bit bigger, but anyhow, let's call it a video. I hope that's not too long. Here's hoping you guys enjoy doing this. I'm gonna have one more video, the fleshing it out, turning it into a human being. Thank you.